Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and a doctoral student of psychology. Today, I want to talk about why avoidants hesitate to commit and then how the process of committing works like for them. They often commit later than other attachment styles. So it feels closer to when almost like when you're at the end of your ropes, even though they think it's just the beginning. The beginning for them, for you, it's like the end, okay? And so it's not the beginning from your perspective. And so let's first talk about why this is. It's usually a surrender, but it's a surrender to their attachment fears, and they just kind of are letting go of their fears, usually because of a combination of things. So let's first talk about why they hesitate. Even when an avoidant is deeply in love with you, in fact, almost especially so, they may resist commitment due to this internal calculation. This calculation, a lot of it is that trauma or neglect, but they don't perceive it as such, which is even more tricky because it's regarding their identity, the loss of options potentially, but not options in a relationship wise, options of their lifestyle. And I'll explain that a little bit more in detail, but also their perception of risk. So let's talk about the options portion because it's very common. Avoidants have this view of what they thought they would be. Almost all avoidants, you can ask them that they had the perception. Some of them might even say, yeah, I was open to having kids in marriage, but I always wanted it this way. And when you hear the way it sounds, it's basically not kids in marriage. It's the label of kids in marriage, but basically they're by themselves. Interesting enough, you will see that because I've had plenty of avoidants that say, I want to get married. A lot of them say that. But if you ask them what that sounds like, it's not a marriage. It's not a healthy marriage or even a potential marriage. It's almost impossible for a marriage to even be built into that. Like no one could marry you if they barely know you. Very unlikely, depending on certain characteristics. But a lot of avoidants don't think of those two. They don't put two and two together. And so their option of life was maybe they get married a certain way where they basically are never home. And they have a life of like adventure and travel and A, B, and C. And that's their perspective. But they're thinking, okay, if I am to commit to you, I know I can't have that life. I can't just be traveling all the time because I care about you and I don't want that for us, or I don't want to hurt you, or maybe you're not ready for that. And so what you can do with this particular case is you can still be open to whatever lifestyle they want and kind of compromise. However, they're thinking about this. They're calculating this. And so usually this calculation takes quite a bit of time. And the point that they need to reach is this point of surrender to their fears. And I don't mean that they're going to say, okay, all my fears are going to come true. It's they have to surrender to the uncertainty. I'm going to explain this from the perspective of a lot of you guys are actually anxious attached. And so obviously I wasn't anxious attached. So this might not be from a personal stand. I used to be avoidant, but I'm going to try and explain it, how it works for avoidance, trying to use your language. Okay. When you guys are very anxious, what I notice from the anxious individuals I work with, but also externally what I've seen is you're anxious, but there are some times where you're just done with feeling so anxious and you just give up on it. Like with relationships, a lot of times you're worried, you want this person to care about you, but you feel like, okay, it's never going to happen. I give up, I'm leaving. And you're seriously done. I've seen a lot of anxious people where they are done. Basically, they have given up on their fears. I don't care if I'm abandoned. I don't care about it. I'm out. If I'm abandoned, then I'm abandoned. I don't care if I'm afraid of being alone. Let me be alone. They give up on the fear. Avoidants have their version of it, but their version is not getting out of a relationship. Their version is getting in because their fears are about in the relationship. And so they almost feel like, you know what? If I lose myself, if I lose my identity, so what? I don't even care. That's that surrender point. Does that make sense? And so it's not really a positive feeling, but it is a feeling. And you're going to have to let them do that. You're going to have to let them process it because every single avoidant had that moment where they're like, you know, whatever. Let me just do this. Let me just let go of that old identity. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. And it's not a good feeling. It's a tough feeling. It's an angry feeling, right? It's a feeling where you're almost like, I don't want to let this go. Why do I have to do this? But let them, because every avoidant had to do it. I had to do it. And then they realize it's not that bad, but they have to do that first. So that's that surrender point, okay? And so this moment where that happens, the prior to that feeling, is they almost realize that their life is better with you than without you. And they have to perceive the cost of the commitment in comparison to the cost of what it is to lose you. That's what it has to feel like. And so normally, what builds up in the relationship to get them to this point? Because this is the most important stuff, right? We can talk about the mechanisms of it all we want, but the main point is how do we get there? Okay. So we're going to probably go over, I'll do it like this. Let's talk about how to get to that point and then also how to know your avoidant is getting to that point because I feel like those are two different things. So I'm going to try and organize it like that. We'll see, okay? So the first one is space built into the relationship. And so space built into the relationship means that maybe sometimes you guys have trips without each other. Maybe sometimes you guys, even if you live together, for example, you still don't do everything together. Most of the time you're not going to, but it might be built in. Maybe every Friday you have time with your friends, and maybe every Friday or every Saturday they have time with their friends. Something that's built in a structure, okay? The next one is there's often respectful exchange. Avoidants really like respectful exchange. Have a productive day. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for cooking for me. I appreciate you doing that. That was a lot. That makes sense. You are doing great. They really like that respectful exchange. Now, a lot of people who are anxious attached, not all the time, but I've had some calls where people mention this, especially those who are still really struggling with their own trauma, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Please understand there's nothing wrong with that. They might feel like talking like this means you guys are strangers. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. I appreciate you taking the time to take my call. Avoidants love this. Anxious people think it feels like a little bit of distance. And so maybe meet in the middle a little bit. Do that sometimes. Don't do it all the time. But this respectful exchange really helps avoidants to feel safe because this to them really means it's engaging. The relationship is safe. It's good. They like that. Okay. The next one is very important. Very important. It's basically try not to make difficult topics too lengthy, okay? And so I never recommend like putting a timer, so please don't think that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying time your conversations. I'm saying keep an approximate of what the limit is for your partner, okay? And so everyone has their own limits, but the most common limit, which I understand people are going to get upset about, I've noticed with most of the cases that I work with is around 10 minutes. If a conversation, a heavy conversation goes longer than 10 minutes, deactivation and potential rejecting the anxious partner's advances increases very high. And so if you're noticing the conversation is getting a little lengthy, maybe you can briefly glance at the clock and think, okay, it's been around this time. I'm noticing this person's getting a little triggered. Let me back off. You can evaluate what the time is, but typically there's a mark where avoidants start getting really uncomfortable. And if they have conversations where they don't reach that mark too much, where they don't pass it too often, they actually are much more open to hearing what you have to say. And I want that for you. And so I'm not saying literally keep your phone on you and have the, clock there all the time, but just keep in mind, okay, sometimes being concise helps you. It's on your side, okay? The next one is conflict is handled without ultimatums. Avoidants really love this one. You guys know I've talked about this before. As long as there's not too many ultimatums or really an absence of ultimatums, avoidants feel pretty comfortable. As long as it's concise and not too much ultimatums, they feel pretty good about it. And so how do you know the avoidant is getting to this surrender point? They're more comfortable talking about the future. This one is really good. Now, I don't mean they're saying, hey, let's have 10 kids tomorrow. That's not biologically possible, but you guys get what I'm saying, right? They're not saying that. They're just talking about, okay, I'm open to this, or yeah, we can go to the carnival next year. Or if you ever have an issue with your phone, I'll fix that, whatever it is. That is actually an interesting point because for me, I remember with my partner, he actually, interesting enough, he was also avoidant. I guess he was quicker than I was, but for him, that's how I knew, like in the first couple months, I understand this is quicker for most cases with avoidance, but I knew that this was something he was leaning towards because the way he spoke. I remember something was going on with my phone and he fixed it. And he said something like, next time you need that, I'll fix it for you. And he said, likely the model will change in a couple of years, but in a couple of years, I still will figure it out and we'll figure that down on the line, right? So he was saying down the line in a couple years, I'll still be able to fix your phone for you. That's a very small thing. And that was like very early in the beginning of our relationship. But that was a clue that I didn't even realize for him. He meant, yeah, I'm going to be here and we're going to still be this or more. And so signs like this, they will say something like, yeah, next birthday, I'll do this. Or let's say they're 40 and they're saying, yeah, on my 50th birthday, you can do that. I'm not ready for my 40th. Something like that, where they're actually giving timelines. The next one is more awareness around their own deactivation. They can say, when you do that, that triggers me. Or when you do that, that makes me uncomfortable. They're more comfortable. And the last one is this one is probably the most important. If I said the first one was the most important, I changed my mind. This one is the most important because this one is lasting. They're making other changes in their life. Maybe she had body image issues and she's actively working on that. She's being more comfortable in her own skin. Maybe he had anger and he's actively working to communicate better. And so these are signs that an avoidant is reaching that point. I hope this video is helpful to somebody. Please like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.